It's gonna be a long one, folks, okay? Prepare yourselves. Gird your loins. Hello, and welcome to my Q4 wrap-up of everything I read from September to December. The only books I'm not gonna be talking about are the Kane Chronicles because I read them in a different reading vlog. This section only has 3 books, okay? Because the rest were like genre fiction. First, we have Anne of the Island, which is the 3rd book in the Anne of Green Gables series, which I've been very slowly reading my way through. But usually it's one of the only books that gets its own like standalone review, but not this time because I was not like taken out the way I usually am and fully expected to be. This is the book where Anne and Gilbert and their other friends are at university, and it's when they eventually get together, okay? So I expected this to be yearning city, and it just wasn't. Instead, somebody dies of consumption and they try to kill a cat. So, I mean, it was still good though. There's a lot of like about her growing up, not just in terms of like getting older and having to do more adult things, but just like existentially. There's also a lot of like very beautiful nature writing, as one would expect from Ella Montgomery. For the Ex Hex Serpent, I know that many people love this book, and it was fine. It centers around Cora, who is a amateur naturalist, and her very abusive, shitty, gross husband dies and she is free. And so she decides that her, with her very kind of odd son and then her companion and friend Martha, who is a socialist and we love her, decide to move to Essex. Well, there's all these rumors going around about the Essex Serpent and like bad things happening in these little towns. She also strikes up this relationship with a pastor, and a lot of their conversations revolve around the major themes of the book, which are evolution, religion, eugenics, and social housing, okay? Because it is 1893, so we're in the age of reason, okay? A lot going on socially. I did start to enjoy it a bit more when I realized that the writing actually reminded me a lot of Virginia Woolf's writing, particularly into The Lighthouse, where you have this group of people that's somewhat sprawling that are all interconnected, and a lot of their narration is focused around their inner lives and how they're reacting to the people around them. Although I can appreciate it, it's not my favorite type of writing just because I feel like you're always kept at a distance, which doesn't feel as engaging to me. Moon of the Crusted Snow. Okay, wow. As winter approaches in this very rural northern Anishinaabe town, the community goes completely dark, okay? We're cut off from everything, and it just, you know, goes from there. I don't really want to give a lot away. It is a very short book, and it really is just a perfectly constructed novel. If you at all enjoy apocalyptic-y, thrillery, any of that, or you're interested in trying it out, very much recommend this book. We've got a lot of witchy books, okay? The first one I'm gonna start off with is Payback's a Witch. It's very much John Tucker Must Die meets the Triwizard Tournament, all right? So I had a very uneven reading experience with this one. The things I liked about it were that, one, it's a sapphic romance, okay? Hello, hi. The vibes were fantastic. Very witchy, cozy, autumnal. Very fun and spooky. I like the way the magic was described. Overall, it was a very satisfying plot and atmosphere. What I didn't like about the book, however, was I felt like there were huge gaps in characterization of the main character. Like, all you really know about her is that she likes her job. There was a lot of slang being used, or like common language vernacular that like already feels dated because language moves so quickly. As my friend Bird from We Read Us on Instagram pointed out, there's like the incorrect use of VE. Like, it just like doesn't, like, it just doesn't work. The Inheritance of Orquídea Divinia, which I listened to an audiobook narrated by Frankie Corzo. I don't want to give away too much about the plot for this one, so all you need to know is that it's very like family, generational, secrets and magic spanning from Ecuador to America. I really love this one. It was very heartfelt, very sexy, sad. It was so nice to read like a witchy magical book that was not written by a white woman. My god. The Ex Hex! Vivi accidentally hexes Reese, the little boyfriend moment, summer fling that broke her heart, okay? She doesn't think it worked. He goes back to Wales where he's from. 9 years later, he's returned and is fully cursed to the point of like putting the entire town in danger. So they have to work together to break the curse and obviously work on their relationship in the meantime. This was very fast-paced, short, sweet, spicy, okay, but also very cozy, spooky. Set in the month of October, like what else could you want from a witchy romance? I genuinely think that this is the best, like, straight romance I've ever read. It was Second Chance, which we know I love, okay? So there's more to kind of work with. There's some little depth there. Also, the way that just like condom use and sexual health and all that kind of stuff was interwoven into the story so masterfully that it in no way felt like a PSA. The only thing I just could not get on board with is the fact that the entire time Reese is wearing these like really douchey sunglasses on his head, and she's like, it would look gross on anybody else, but I'm fine with it on Reese. And I was like, no, there is no amount of digmatized I could get to be okay with someone wearing fucking Oakleys on their head at all times. A bigger issue that I have is that basically they're in this town that was founded by Reese's Welsh family. A little bit of a spoiler, but the founding myth of the town gets challenged a bit in favor of an injustice done to another like white Welsh woman. So even though the author went to the trouble to like disrupt a like colonial foundational myth narrative as like a part of the plot of the story, there was like zero mention of Indigenous peoples and settler colonialism. The author probably does not in any way feel like qualified or like in a position to write a really intensive story about like settler colonialism and Indigenous peoples dispossession and like land rights, but it's just very weird to me that like given the many public discussions we're talking about in terms of getting rid of like statues and like renaming Thanksgiving or Columbus Days to Indigenous Peoples Days, that like why would you go to the trouble of writing that story and not even mentioning it? Like it felt very odd to me. I'm gonna include the Nevermore series in this category as well, okay? The first 3 in the series, which are the only ones that are currently out. I listened to the audiobooks of these twice actually, because they're done by Gemma Whelan and they are fantastic. Okay, she makes it seem like it's a full cast audio. My ears have never beholden anything like this before. Hachette, audio group, book group, whatever, has my heart for this, okay? They have my whole ass. This book, it's perfectly like magical, whimsical, witchy, but so cozy and wondrous. The descriptions of like food and the seasons, oh, with a lot of fantastical situations. We have talking about issues without talking about issues, but like we're talking about issues, you know what I'm saying? For instance, in the first one, there's a lot about, because Morgan is technically illegally in the Nevermore, there's a lot about filthy illegals and people illegally crossing the borders and like that kind of stuff, okay? So we're talking about border violence, okay? But through the lens of a white child, even though there are people of color in the book. Also, the police are only referred to ever as the Stinks, you know what I'm saying? ACAB maybe a little bit. And also talking a lot about how institutions will always put their best interests forward no matter how much they say they care about you. She does a really good job with the adults, especially her mentor. It's very much like the anti-Dumbledore in a lot of ways, which is very satisfying to read. I love Jupiter North, this like very intensely ginger pansexual man. Love him. I also read Basic Witches, which was fine. This was basically like a self-help book, just with a bit of like a witchy perspective, and then there was some kind of historical and social context. What I really liked about it was the first part, which was the first kind of book I've read that really articulated the perspective about witchcraft and not being interested in like supernatural stuff, but basically more just a version of like mindfulness essentially. Poetic Remedies for Troubled Times, which is the second in the like Ask Baba Yaga book situation. I read the first one earlier this year. Very much the same as the first. Enjoyed it a lot, where it's very like absurd yet oddly comforting advice from somebody who's positioned as like an ancient outsider. Herbiary by Maya Toll, illustrated by Kate O'Hara. This is a book I only picked up because I actually bought the oracle cards that were adapted. Actually, I have them right here. They're very, very gorgeous. The whole thing about Maya Toll is that she like went to Ireland to work with a traditional healer. Okay, so there is some stuff, some like white woman, witchy, spiritual person stuff in here that I could have done without. There's a lot of like, oh, the Cherokees say this every once in a while, and it's like, you have no idea what that comes from or what that means. Like, what? And there is even some imagery in the book, like there's a dream catcher and stuff, which I would like didn't need to be there, and there's like no reason for it, like, you know what I mean? Lastly, I have The Christmas Witch by Aubrey Plaza and Dan Murphy, illustrated by Julia Iredale. So this is like a children's storybook about Santa Claus's twin sister. They become separated from a young age. He grows up to be Santa with like some Danish people, and she continues on her path of being like a nature forest witch. And then when she emerges into the world, she finds out that people are like afraid of her. It was such a delight to like read and treasure. If you want to hear more about it, Aubrey Plaza was doing like her little book tour interview circuit, and it's wild, as one would expect.
No.
Now it's time for some romance. And wow, do we have a lot to talk about. First and foremost, the first two books in the Irish Born trilogy by none other than Nora Roberts, which I'm buddy reading with Emma, obviously. The first one is Born in Fire, and it centers around Maggie, who's a glass artist living in County Clare, I believe. Very close with her father, okay? He's the one who always encouraged her and like paid for her to pursue her dream. And it starts with him just like dying in front of her, so just like trauma to begin with. And then we have her sister Brianna. They both have a terrible relationship with their mother, who's just fucking awful. And it's because she had Maggie out of wedlock in sin. We're talking Irish Catholicism in the 90s, like we're really going in on, you know, the shame and being a fallen woman and blaming her children for these things and just being a bad person. So that's fun. As her career is starting to take off, she encounters this very wealthy gallery owner named Rogan Sweeney. Even though this is an early 90s romance book, wow, does this book feel like very progressive? It's almost like gender role reversed from what we usually see, which I loved. Like this, the romance was so good. In the words of Emma, we love a sexually liberated glassblower. The only thing that was weird about this book is that there's a part where Maggie goes to Dublin to see her artwork being shown, and there's a scene where they have a bunch of what's described as Native American art. In my most generous reading, it seems like what Nora was trying to do was try to make a comment about the hypocrisy of the ways in which Europeans justified a lot of settler colonialism through the depiction of Indigenous peoples as being savage, contrasted with like the actual history of Europeans. It just didn't really land, and it did not age well if it was ever done well. You know what I mean? The second one, Born in Ice, focuses on Brianna, a kind of mysterious, very famous American crime writer, comes to stay at her B&B cottage for like 4 months while he's writing his newest book. And obviously they fell in love. Because Brianna has always been the peacemaker between her sister and her mother, which totally makes sense in terms of a family dynamic. However, Maggie is such a dramatic, engaging, exciting character that switching more to Brianna was honestly just, it was more boring. I didn't mind the guy in the romance. I did like both of the characters' kind of journeys, you know what I'm saying, within the relationship. Beach read. So Emily Henry is a menace to society, or at least that's how it feels, because I listen to her books when they're narrated by Julia Wayland, and it feels so intense when it's happening. In classic Emily Henry fashion, we have tiny sunshine woman named January, and we have tall, dark-haired, brooding Gus. Although being small sunshine woman, we start with January being very disillusioned about like love and life since her father has just unexpectedly passed, and then she found out that he kind of had like a little bit of a secret life. She also like can't write, which is her career job situation, and her boyfriend left her because she's not fun anymore after her dad died. So, you know, and the last thing that her dad leaves her is his little love check, I guess we could say, back in his hometown. She has nowhere else to go, so she has to go and deal with that whole process. And then it turns out that her next door neighbor is none other than her college writing nemesis slash person she was secretly in love with. It was fun because there was a lot of like Gus being a well-known literary fiction author, and then her being a well-known romance or like women's fiction author, and like a lot of that coming to head. Then we have Actor Age Eve Brown, which is the third and final book in the Brown Sisters series. In this one, we follow the youngest sister, Eve, whose parents basically tell her that she's cut off from the trust fund unless she figures out how to keep down a job because she's got lots of ideas, not a lot of follow through or sticking through anything the second anything gets rough. So in a fit of pique, which to be honest I thought was kind of justified, she takes off, stumbles across a B&B cottage situation, hello themes, and finds out that they're looking to hire a chef, and she tries to get the job and accidentally runs over the main love interest person in the parking lot. Jacob, so you know. This was again a sunshine woman grumpy dynamic. However, this one felt different to me and I actually enjoyed it because I enjoyed Jacob so much. And it's not just he was grumpy, it's that he was angry in a very fun way, okay? A lot of passion coming. It wasn't just like an emotionally unavailable, grumpy distantness. There was, I feel, a lot more kind of discussions about sex in this one, and honestly I feel like the Talia Hibbert books have gotten, like in this series, I feel like they've gotten better in general through each one in a lot of ways. We also had the use of sex toys. The only thing I didn't like about this one was the third act conflict because it was much more similar to the first one where Jacob just goes off in a way that's just too far and is like kind of cruel, honestly. Like that's a lot to pull back from. Now we have a few holiday romances. Hello, the first one is Written in the Stars. What I liked about this book is that it's a queer sapphic romance. Okay, we love. I like that it was sexy. I like that there was very like limited miscommunication and stuff was addressed like pretty quickly. What I disliked about this book was everything else, okay? I really did not like the narrator. I found all the characters to be kind of super annoying and boring. It also just wasn't that holiday-y like at all. Like it was just kind of happening in the background, but there was absolutely no holiday like vibes, which is like the point of reading a holiday romance. Hello. Also, it was a Pride and Prejudice retelling, which I just like didn't realize until like 60% of the way through the book. But honestly, it was just missing that something that good romance books have where you feel like invested. Then we have Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey, which I read because of Emma. Okay, she was very insistent. This one's very sweet and also quite sexy, also very short. It features a goth ex-convict and a like tall bow tie sunshine man from the South working together at a department store in New York. And it turns out I much prefer a sunshine man grumpy women situation, okay? I only ever want to read about kind, gentle, supportive men from now on. This book is incredibly respectful in terms of navigating the power imbalances in their relationship. Other things that were addressed in this book that I haven't seen in other romances before. A character being an ex-convict and navigating life post-incarceration. Also like friendships and like toxic friendships and boundaries. Also mutual butt stuff. So there's that. It did remind me a lot of like Helen Hoang's writing and like the kiss quotient in terms of I like the characters and like the messaging that's happening, but some of the language of the actual like romance and attraction itself and like the sex is like kind of a lot for me. The word mound was used a lot, like way more than I was comfortable with. Lastly, for this section, we have the Sugar Cookie Sweetheart Swap, I think it's called. This is by the same authors who did like the Cottage and Pumpkin and Vine situation, where we have like 3 short novellas all set in the same town. This time it's 3 different friends who each get to have their little love moment in the midst of their small mountain town. I really like the first one, especially because it was 2 college like best friends who were secretly in love with each other, like reuniting after 9 years apart. So like it just made more sense in terms of like a shorter timeline and like, you know what I mean? I'm almost through the second one and I hate it. I really don't like it. This character had a lot of potential, okay? She's the one who makes erotic gingerbread men for a living, okay? That could go in a lot of places. In this one, she's like holed up with this guy who crashed his car that she like rescued, and it just feels very forced. So here's hoping for the third one. You know what? We're gonna do the last section tomorrow because I'm tired of doing this and you're probably tired of looking at me. All right, let's finish strong with some nonfiction. We have The Heroines of Olympus. So this book features 50 women from Greek mythology with a vignette that's kind of like imagined from their main stories, a portrait, and then like a 2-page spread on the myths about them, and I appreciated that there was like a little bit of analysis thrown in to really like round out their stories. This is another like feminist analysis or representation kind of a situation, so I did appreciate that it's very upfront and explicit about sexual assault and how deeply interwoven that is into like all of the stories, and also just like, you know, general misogyny. In a similar myth moment, we also have Norse Myths, which was written by Matt Ralphs, I believe, and illustrated once again by Katie Ponder, because this is part of the DK Witness children's book series on different mythologies. I talked about the Greek one earlier this year. Similar to the first one, this one is just gorgeous. It is such a beautiful read. The illustrations are incredible, really good telling of the stories, and then as well a lot of contextual information to help you understand them. Rating Sweetgrass. Okay, so I actually purchased the like special like hardcover beautiful edition for myself as a gift. Taurus shit, you know what I'm saying? Last Christmas, so I started reading it earlier this year, but I just wasn't really clicking with it in the way that I thought I might, so I switched to the audiobook, which was definitely the move. If you are going to read this book, I highly recommend the audiobook. It's read by the author, but I also read the book, which is why it took me this long to finish it, because I wanted to like annotate and really engage with it since I'd invested in the experience. The simplest way I can explain this book is that it is written by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a Potawatomi botanist, and it's about kind of navigating and her experience bringing together indigenous Potawatomi and other knowledge with her like Western botany training. It definitely did help me reframe how I saw things about nature, and I also think it does a really great job of really discussing the actual mechanics of gratitude and reciprocity. And something to note is that there is a lot of criticism of this book from other indigenous like writers and scholars, etc., which I'm going to link below because I cannot really speak to it. It's a good reminder that indigenous peoples are not a monolith, because sometimes when books like this do kind of rise up to the mainstream and become such a big deal, it tends to obscure all the other like very nuanced conversations that are happening under it. How to Be a Woman by Caitlin Moran. All right, let's get into it. How to Be a Woman was a huge important book for me because it was very much my first feminist book. I felt like I just kind of outgrown her writing a bit and was reaching for more intersectional critical race theory, that kind of analysis. But I decided to pick this one up to kind of like, I don't know, return to my roots, revisit her writing, see how I felt, how it's changed, how I've changed, you know, little check-in, if you will. I don't know if this is intentionally the bi flag colors. The front of the book is blurbed by a magazine that says that Caitlin Moran is like the Chelsea Handler, Lena Dunham, and Tina Fey of England, which is like the biggest red flag, so that didn't bode well. However, I did enjoy it. It's specifically about her now being a middle-aged woman and talking about aging, family, marriage, parenting, okay, all of it. This is absolutely in no way a groundbreaking intersectional feminist text, nor does it in any way try to be, okay? She's very much writing from her own perspective. What Caitlin Moran is so good at writing about is the different ways that men and women tend to be socialized, and then the impacts of that later on in terms of relationality. So in terms of dealing with your siblings, parents, bosses, boyfriends, husbands, like, and basically the consequences of that socialization. Birth Work as Care Work, which is a book I bought from an anarchist book fair in like 2015 during my undergrad, and I finally read. We're specifically looking at reproductive justice through the lens of birth work. It's an anthology of sorts that has lots of contributions from many people working in the field as midwives and doulas, as well as people who work in a more activist capacity. Some of the major themes of this book is talking about medicalization and the huge inequality of access in the current medical system. This one is focused mostly in the US, but also talking about how like natural birth has very much been co-opted by white middle class women, and how that's also not helpful in the struggle to achieve equal birthing. Daughter of Family G, or what is now known as Before My Time by Amy McKay. So this book is a memoir, and I bought it when it came out because she is one of, if not my favorite author. This one, however, is a memoir about how she is part of the oldest studied cancer family in the world, I think. The story is told so well. It was done in such an interesting narrative structure where she focuses on 3 different timelines. One being her ancestors, specifically the women in her family, and charting the process of how her family like came to be studied, and then her growing up, and then her essentially as she's writing the book and her oldest son is getting tested for it as well. And this book does exactly what I love so much about her writing, where it masterfully weaves in like the history of sexuality, reproductive health and rights, and eugenics all so well into the narrative, okay? Like all of her books do. Last one, we did it. Oh my god. It is I Hope We Choose Love, A Trans Girl's Notes from the End of the World by Kai Cheng Tom. It is told in this very like short stories and like poetry. I didn't really like the first third of the book. She's talking a lot about like call out culture and that kind of stuff. Not because I don't think those discussions aren't worth having, just because it was written about in such a vague way and like alluded to a time where like she was canceled, but like went into like no detail, not wanting to like share people's names and the specifics of situations, like totally understandable. But it was vague to the point that like I didn't even really know why we were talking about it or like what I was supposed to get from it, because it wasn't like rooted in anything. But I enjoyed the rest of it a lot more. I enjoyed her discussions of like queer community and her applying her psychology background as well as her background in activism, as also sex work, in terms of how that manifests in a lot of tendencies within the queer community. Also talking a lot about like trauma and suicide in a way that I thought was actually really helpful. She does tackle a lot of these themes in her previous 2 books, Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, and then A Place Called No Homeland, which is her poetry collection. Those 2 I really like. Well, if you've made it this far, congratulations and wow. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye!